guys. You can have a seat. Isn't it great to have, when our half of our worship band is out, and these two guys, of course, Logan, we can just jump in and lead, and Zach can play anything. I don't really like Zach because Zach plays anything. And Logan, I don't really like Logan either because he can play anything. Logan normally plays keyboards, and Zach normally plays drums. And so we have some people out, and they're just filling in playing different things, and it's great too. We're very fortunate to have them. So we're in this series of going through 2 Timothy. So you can go ahead and turn your Bible. Some of it will be on the screen, maybe, in a minute. We're having technical difficulties with our computer at the moment, but we'll see if something's there. If you don't have a Bible, turn your tablet, your phone, whatever your memory, if you have it memorized like Patrick does, you can go ahead and do that. But we'll be in chapter 3 tonight. So before we get there, though, work with me. We're family here tonight. So what do you think of when you hear the word blind spot? What is a blind spot to you? How would you define or describe a blind spot? And it's probably, I guess, self-explanatory. What does it mean to you? A weakness. Oh, okay. I wouldn't have thought of that. That's good.
When you're driving and you can't see.
Yeah, when you're driving, that's kind of the typical. When you're driving, there's just always some vehicles have more blind spots than other vehicles. Some drivers, we won't mention names, but have more blind spots than others. I've had blind spots in my life when I'm driving, but weakness, I like that too. Anything else? Anything different? What? Okay, the blinders. Yeah, the blinders that they put on horses, and we're going to talk about that tonight too, because I'm a horse specialist. So what is that called? Somebody's a horse specialist. Equestrian. Yeah, I'm not an equestrian at all. But anyway, so here's the reason that blinders or blind spots or blinders or whatever are an issue. We all have them. We all have some blinders. If we're capable of putting blinders up, or we all have some areas in our lives that would really be considered blind spots. Logan mentioned about driving. I used to work for an Exxon distributor. I used to drive a truck for an Exxon distributor because I was married and I needed a job, and I wasn't in ministry yet, and I just got out of college, and so I went to work for, did a couple different things, but I went to work for this Exxon distributor, and I was driving this truck that had just a lot of blind spots, and I was just being lazy, and I was late for the delivery that I was making, so I was weaving on. Blind spots are usually when we're merging, right, or we're merging into traffic, or we're getting onto the interstate, or whatever, and so I was merging onto the interstate, and it was a pretty big truck, and I didn't hit the person, but I kind of, I was pushed somebody off the road, basically, and it's because they were in my blind spot. Plus, I was in a hurry, like I said, and it was my fault, but they were in my blind spot. I just didn't see them, and I had mirrors everywhere. And I won't tell you what they gestured to me, but they thought a lot of me. They told me I was number one. So, but anyways, so that's just those things that we don't pay attention to, right? In fact, here's a blind spot. Is the typical definition of a blind spot? It says this. A blind spot is a portion of a field or a thing that it cannot be seen or inspected with the available equipment. So what you have, the equipment you have, is not good enough, right? It can't fully inspect so there's some blind spots there. You have blind spots because of that. But I gave a different definition from a spiritual standpoint, because we all have spiritual blind spots as well. And here's how I wrote down spiritual blind spots. It's a tendency to ignore something, especially because it is difficult or unpleasant. It's a weakness. And we don't want to go there because we have a weakness in it. And so we intentionally put on those blinders. Like Heather said, those blinders. Blinders are things that they use for horses They'll put blinders on the horses so that they won't see what's beside them, right? The horses beside them, so they won't be distracted by other things. They'll be focused on what they're supposed to be focused on. Plus the guy's whipping, like crazy. They'll be focused on what they're supposed to be focused on. And so they have those blinders so they don't see the distractions around them. And that's kind of what happens with us. We need to be focused on the thing in front of us and not get distracted. But so often we get distracted from the blind spots. There's things that we don't want to deal with, things that we need to deal with in our lives, but we don't want to deal with. Well, Paul, as he writes to Timothy in this letter, as we're talked about, we've referred to this keeping the faith, and we've used the verse 2 Timothy 4:7. I don't know if that is. You can read it too. It's big. Some of them might be a little microscopic, so we'll just go with that. But he says, I have fought the good fight. I've finished the race. I have kept the faith. I've kept the faith. Wouldn't it be great at the end of our lives, whenever that is, we can say that? Man, I have fought the good fight. I have fought the good fight. I've finished my race. I've kept the faith. Listen, things in life, and I'm not telling you things you don't already know. You've lived long enough, no matter how old you are. You don't have to be my age, which, by the way, I just had another birthday, so I'm a year older now. But you don't have to be my age. You've had some issues in life where it's been difficult to keep your faith, isn't it? I'm not saying you lose your relationship. Because I don't, if you have genuinely have a relationship with Christ, I don't believe you can lose that relationship. That's just my opinion. And I believe that's I don't know. I believe the Bible's pretty clear about that. But I think we can kind of lose our faith, or at least lose the joy of our salvation, right? Because things in life don't always go as planned, do they? At least not the way we planned them. They go as God planned, but not always the way we planned. And we go through difficulties, and sometimes we have those blind spots up, and we don't see things, and those things that we should be dealing with, they come and they attack, and they just take us to places we don't need to go. And that's part of what Paul is going to write. We're going to read from Paul tonight. So we've talked over the last few weeks, how do we keep this faith? Remember, Paul was writing to a young pastor, Timothy. And remember his first words in 1 Timothy, he says, I urged you to remain in Ephesus. Why would he have to say that? Because he knew that life was not going to be easy for Timothy. And he told him to remain. I'm urging you, I'm pleading with you, remain. Don't lose your faith, because at this moment, you may be going through something that, I hate to say it this way, but, I'll just say difficult. It's just the most horrible thing you could be going through. But he's saying, don't lose your faith. Don't give up. Fight the good fight, because this is just going to be for a season. And on the other side of this, you're going to be stronger because of it, if you'll just trust in me. So, in the second letter, he offers a picture of Paul at the ending of his life, the ministry, and the death, and we read about that. But we've talked about this as we've gone on through this whole chapter, or this whole letter, that how we are to keep the faith, and how do we do that, and the steps that we take, and all of those different things. So tonight we're going to look at what happens if we don't focus, if we ignore the blind spots. Okay? If we ignore these things in our lives, that because we've put up blinders. And I'm glad that Heather said that, because a blinder here's what they are. They're a small pair of these screens attached to the horse's bridle to prevent them from seeing sideways or behind them. That they can't see what's beside them, or they can't see what's behind them. It's something that prevents them from gaining a full understanding of a situation. We can't live life with these blinders on. Now, sometimes, I'll be honest with you, I wish we could, because I don't want to see a lot of things that are happening in the world. Because the world is just, it's going crazy, right? Things are just nuts in the world. Our pastor was talking about it this morning, just some of the things that are going through, going to be voted on in different states, and things that are just so far away from anything familiar to Christianity at all. But we can't go through life with blinders, because then, especially in our own lives, because it'll keep us from seeing things in our lives that we need to fix and to adjust. So tonight we're going to look at the dangers of having these blind spots. So if you look at 2 Timothy chapter 3, we're going to read verses 1 through 5, and they may be up here. I don't know. He says, but understanding this, meaning he's talking about, he's getting into the last days. He's talking about the last days. And remember, writing, when the people in this time, they thought the last days were like, they were coming soon. They thought they were living in the last days. In fact, Paul, I've told you this before, but Paul chastised the Thessalonians a little bit because they had just kind of quit working. They quit doing things. They quit because they knew that the Messiah was coming back in their time, in their lifetime, and they quit doing things. So Paul said, no, you can't. Yes, he's coming back, but you can't stop doing what you're doing. You got to get back to work. You got to live life, right? So they were really thinking that last days were going to be really soon. And I don't know when the last days are. I think all I know is we're closer to the last days today than we were yesterday. That's all I know. I don't know how close that is, but we're getting there, right? So he says, understand this, in the last days, there will come times of difficulty. Well, we all got that, right? That's pretty hard to understand. For people, here's where he gets specific. People will be lovers of self, lovers of money. They'll be proud, arrogant, abusive, disobedient to their parents, which is none of you in the room, I'm sure. Ungrateful, unholy, heartless, unappeasable, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not loving good, treacherous, reckless, swollen with conceit, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having the appearance of godliness but denying its power. Avoid such people. Paul is such a motivational person, isn't he? He's really not. He's not a motivational person. But this is what he's writing about, and this is what we're going to talk about tonight. So let me pray. Father, thank you so much for your word. I pray that you will open our eyes, our ears, to hear what you have to say to us in this very familiar passage. Lord, we're your servants. We just want to hear a fresh word from you. Lord, we ask these things in your name. Amen. So here's the first thing. If we put up blind spots in our life, the first things, if we do that, it can cause disasters in our lives. Did you see that? In verse 1, he talks about, I'm going back and forth with my glasses off and on. It's going to kill me. It's probably going to bother you too. But he says there can be difficulty. There's going to be times of difficulty. And then he says people are going to be loving things that we don't meant to love. We were never created to love these things, but we're going to love them because it's just creating disaster. If we don't pay attention, if we have these blind spots in our lives, if you don't deal with the sin quickly, it can lead to disaster in our lives. Now, I don't, my wife sitting right here, she could tell you, I don't like to deal with things typically. If it's difficult, my gut reaction, my first gut reaction is not to deal with it right away. I don't necessarily want to bury it. I don't necessarily want to push it away, but I don't want to deal with it right then. Sometimes because I'm a thinker and I like to process, but sometimes because I'm afraid to deal with it right then. I am. And that's a weakness. As James talked about, it's a weakness. So we have to learn that if we don't deal with it right, then it can lead us into places that we never intended to go. If we don't deal with that whatever it is, he goes on and he says, you'll be lovers of self. We weren't meant to be lovers of self. God didn't create us that way. He didn't create us to love money. That's not what we were created, but it'll lead us into difficulty in our lives if we're not careful. It gets out of control and it runs our lives and it ruins our lives. I was telling the guys earlier that I've never met, and I've met several people who have been addicted to different things. I've buried two brothers who, because of addictions, I've presided over their funerals because of addictions. Neither one of them, and I've never met anybody else that have had trouble with addictions that have said, I really just want to ruin my life. Nobody says that, right? That's not why they start it. They started to because they want to get away from some sort of life. They think it's a release maybe or whatever. They don't do it because they want to, but they don't want to do it because they want to destroy their life, but they don't intend enough to not destroy their life. And listen, it could happen to any of us if we keep those blind spots, if we keep those blinders on. If we don't focus on it and we don't deal with that sin right away, we don't know where it can lead us. We don't know where that can lead us. Listen to what James says. He said, James chapter 1 verse 15 says, "Then desire, when it is conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is fully grown brings forth death." It's a progression, right? It progresses. Temptation is not sinful, but it can lead to sin. Sin, if it's not dealt with, can lead to death. Basically, is what he's saying. If we don't deal with these things in our life, it's fully grown. If we don't take the blinders off and deal with whatever it is that we have in our life that we need to deal with, it can lead us into places that we don't need to go. There's that old saying I was telling the guys earlier. Said, when you first quote somebody, you have to quote them and say so and so said, and then after the second time you can say my friend said this, and then the third time it's just yours. You can claim it as your own quote or whatever. And that there's that famous quote. I really don't know who said it first, but sin takes you farther than you ever intended to go, keeps you longer than you ever intended to stay, and it costs you more than you ever intended to pay. That's what sin does in our lives. If we don't deal with it, if we keep those blinders up and we keep them in our blind spots, it can cause total destruction and wreak havoc in your life. And let me just tell you, not just your life. It has a rippling effect. You've seen that, haven't you? I mean, you've seen it in other people's lives, maybe in your extended family life, whatever. It doesn't just affect the person that's dealing with it. In many cases, in every case that I've seen it, it affects multiple people, doesn't it? When there's some unrepented sin that somebody they're just not willing to deal with, they're not the only ones that are feeling the effects of it. Eventually, there's going to be a lot of people feeling the effects of that one sin that they chose not to deal with. It'll cause us and lead us to destruction. Blind spots can cause us to miss opportunities that God provides for us. He provides opportunities for us every day. And if we have our blinders on, we miss those opportunities. So don't miss opportunities. Blind spots can cause blind blots. I don't know why I said that. Blind spots can cause trouble. Secondly, blind spots can cause us to be degenerates. Don't you love being called that? You ever been called a degenerate? You bunch of degenerate. I've never been called a degenerate, at least not to my face. I don't know. Somebody probably has called me that before. I don't know. But he lists all of these things, and some translations say a degenerate. A degenerate is a corrupt person. They're deteriorating, right? They're corrupt. They're living for things of the world. That's what he lists in verses 2 through 4. He lists all of these things. Look at the list. Lovers of self, lovers of money, prideful, they're arrogant, they're abusive, they're disobedient to parents, they're ungrateful, they're unholy. I mean, he just doesn't beat around the bush, right? He cuts right to the jugular. They're full of conceit, they're reckless, they're treacherous, they're brutal, they don't love God, they love other things other than God. This is a horrible list, right? Ignoring sins in our lives can get us there if we're not careful. If we ignore these things, if we put up blinders and we have these blind spots, we don't focus on these things, it can cause us to get there. We don't want to go there. We don't intend to go there. We just don't intend enough to not go there. Listen to what James says in chapter 4, verse 4. You adulterous people. James is another one that he likes to beat around the bush quite a bit, and just doesn't go right for it. He does right here, though. You adulterous people, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. Listen, it is impossible, according to James and other places in the New Testament, it is impossible to love things of the world and things of God. It's impossible. I mean, we have to live like a hermit, and we can't. No, that's not what he's saying there. But I think, I have passions, that are of the world. We talked about it this morning at our church. Our pastor talked about sports teams, and how people are just, we're crazy about sports teams, and I love sports. You guys know that I played sports when I was. People wanted me to play sports for them. I played sports. Now I've gotten too old. Nobody wants me to play anymore. But I love sports. I love watching sports. I love all of that. But listen, what he's saying, when those things of this world overtake our passion and our desire for God, that's the real issue. Is it that do you love things of the world more than you love, or as much as you love things of God? That's the issue. We can't. They can't both be top priority in our lives. Things of God have to take precedence in our lives. Or else we're going to look like the rest of the world. And have you looked at the rest of the world lately? Not really living for God, is it? It's not. People are not living for God, and then we get kind of confused by, man, why is the world looking so rough? Well, because we get confused that people that don't know God don't live for him. Shocker, they're not going to until they meet Christ, right? John says this, 1 John 2, verse 15 and 16, do not love the world or things of the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh, the desires of the eyes, and the pride of life is not from the Father, but is from the world. If we love worldliness, loving of worldliness doesn't come from God. It doesn't come from him. It comes from ignoring these little sins. And when I say little, I put quotes around those that we call these little sins in our lives. We compare, don't we? I don't know, maybe you don't. I do. At least I didn't do that. At least I didn't say those words. At least I didn't do what so-and-so did. But see, that's the wrong comparison. We don't compare ourselves to other people in the world. Who do we compare ourselves to? We're to compare ourselves to what Scripture tells us that a Christ follower looks like. Christ is the example that we all, as a Christ follower, are to live by. Now, are we going to be perfect and sinless? No, we've missed the boat on that one. We can't be that. But we can strive to live for Christ. That's who we are to live by, not by comparing ourselves to people in the world. That's not who we're to live like. We're allowing the enemy to distract us, and blind spots can take us there. Love of worldliness does not come from God. It comes from the world. It comes from the enemy. And then the last thing, if we're not careful, blind spots can cause us to be deceitful. Do you see that in verse 5? He says, having the appearance of godliness. They look good on the outside. They look harmless on the outside. Having the appearance of godliness, but denying its power. We deceive ourselves. We deceive other people. He said we become deceitful. We look good on the outside, but it's all an act. There's nothing good on the inside. We probably all know somebody like this, don't we? They look good, they dress up good, whatever, they put on a good appearance. But in the fact of the matter, it's just what Jesus talks about in one of the Gospels where he says they're like a sheep in wolf's clothing. I'm sorry, I got that backwards, didn't I? They're a wolf in sheep's clothing. Yeah, that was pretty bad. Thank you, Max. Appreciate your gentle correction of me. But they're a wolf inside. The outside they look harmless, right? They look like a sheep. I told you before, I've never been around sheep a lot. I don't really know what sheep do. I don't know if they're mean or not. I assume they're not. But I'm a city boy. I've never really been around sheep, but they don't seem harmful. But that's why Jesus says they look harmless on the outside, but on the inside, they're a wolf. In fact, he calls them ravenous wolves. And remember, Peter said that the enemy is always on the prowl looking for someone to devour. We've got to keep our eyes wide open because we are capable of falling prey to that. If we have blind spots or we have blinders up, we are very capable of falling prey to this. Jesus said in Matthew, he says, this people, they honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. We honor God with our lips, but our hearts, do our hearts belong to him? I don't really, when I meet people like, out, not around here necessarily, but like if I'm traveling or whatever season, there's different seasons where I'll travel, I'll fly a lot or something, and I meet people in other places, and I don't really like telling them what I do. Not because I'm ashamed of what I do, because I love what I do, but I don't always just lead with that. Hey, I'm Deron. I'm a pastor. That usually doesn't go very well, but I don't like them. I don't usually lead with that because it can go one of two ways normally. One way is they just would shut down completely when they find out, I'm a preacher or whatever. They just shut down. But in another way, though, sometimes I've seen it this way. Man, they just lay it on thick, right? They're like trying to quote verses to me and tell me all of, and and some I know are genuine, and some, but some of it I just think, dude, just be yourself. Just don't try to impress me with your knowledge of, because is it head knowledge only, or is it heart knowledge? And I guess a little bit of that is me being judgmental. Maybe I shouldn't be so judgmental of people. Maybe their hearts are in the right place. But according to Jesus, there are people that, man, they honor, and we got to be careful. Do we just honor him with our lips, with the things that we say? Or do we really honor him with our heart as well? Does he have our heart or just our minds? In Titus, Paul writes, they profess to know God, but they deny him. He's talking about a different group of people here, but basically it's all in the same. He said they're detestable, disobedient, unfit for any good work. They profess to know God. These certain people that Paul is writing to Titus about, they profess to know God, but they don't know him at all. They just profess it because their actions don't back it up. Let me ask you. Now, I know you're not perfect like we mentioned earlier, and I'm not perfect either, but do your actions back up what you say about your relationship with Christ? Now, I'm not talking about 100% because I don't know if that's, I know mine don't. I was going to say, I don't know if that's possible, but I know mine don't, not 100% of the time. But I'm talking about a lifestyle. As a lifestyle, do our actions back up what we profess to know about or believe about God? I think it's something we all need to look at. Because if our actions don't match our words, according to Paul here to Titus, our words are useless and they're unfit for anything good. If our actions don't match up our words. And let me just be very transparent here with you. The last couple of years, I've kind of chosen a word. I know Lou Ray does this too, or she did this for a while. I've chosen a word, like this is my word for the year. Okay, does that make sense? And so, like this year, this 2022, which I was at a doctor the other day, and she wrote down 2023, and I thought, do you know this? We're not in 23 yet, but anyways. So my word for this year has been intentional. I want to be intentional. And you may think, well, Duh, who doesn't want to be intentional? But what I mean by that is I want to be intentional in every encounter that I have, because I'm typically not. I'm not. I will allow encounters or moments, just whatever. I'll allow them to go away if I'm not paying attention. I want to be intentional, be all in with that whatever moment I am in. I want to be intentional. Now, have I made it best the use of that? Have I been intentional in every moment this year? No, I haven't been. That has always been on my mind. I have it right above my desk at work. I have that word just on a piece of paper, and people are thinking, what does that mean? And it doesn't matter what it means to them, and I know what it means to me. I want to be intentional. I want to be intentional in this. I want to be intentional that my actions back up what I say. There are some people, nobody in the room, by the way, but there's individuals we all have in our lives that it's hard to be intentional in showing Christ's love to them, isn't it? As I didn't ask her if I could say this, but as my wife says, they strain her Christianity. Some people do that, don't they? I had an encounter this past week with a young man that it's hard for me. It doesn't really strain it's hard for me to just always be kind to him, and he has some issues. But I had an encounter with him. I saw him this week, and just had a few moments with him. And I really tried to be intentional and just to listen to him and to listen. I'm not what I need to be. I'm not boasting at all. I'm not patting myself on the back. I'm just saying we need to be intentional in every moment that we're given, because we don't know how many moments we're going to be given, but we also don't know if that person, we don't know what they're going through that day. We don't know all the things, and that may be exactly what they need. Listen, you're going to miss moments. I'm going to miss moments. We've all missed them, and we all will continue to miss them. But be intentional, and let don't be deceitful. Let the words that you say, if the actions back up the word you say. Last passage I want to read to you is from Paul to Ephesians. He says this, "Now this I say and testify in the Lord, that you must no longer walk as the Gentiles do." When you see the word, he's talking about unbelievers. Those that they're not of the chosen. They're unbelievers. They're not followers of Christ. Don't no longer live as the unbelievers do, in the futility of their minds. They are darkened in their understanding, alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them. Because they just don't know any better. It's not because they're dumb. That's not ignorant. They just don't know any better. Due to the hardness of their hearts. They have become callous and have given themselves up to sensuality, greedy, to practice every kind of impurity. You know, when we allow sin to go unnoticed or unkept in our lives, and we don't deal with it, we become calloused. And that sin that used to, early on, used to really break our hearts, it doesn't break our hearts anymore if we allow it to go on. We become callous to it. But that is not the way you learned Christ. That's not how you learned him, he's saying. Assuming that you have heard about him and were taught in him as the truth is in Jesus, to put off your old self, which belongs to your former manner of life that is corrupt through deceitful desires, and to be renewed in the spirit of your minds, and to put on the new self, created to be after the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness. We're not that way anymore. It was before we knew Christ as our Savior. Now we are a new creation. We need to live like that. So let me ask you this as we close. Where have you tended, and I probably will say these a little differently, like I said, where are you prone to put blinders in your life? Things that you don't want to see because it's too hard to deal with. I don't really want to deal with that. It's too embarrassing. It's too hard. Whatever it is. Where are some places, where have you tended to put some blinders up or some blind spots in your life? And then the last thing, just this is for us to respond to, not out loud in front of it, but just to yourself. No matter how much it hurts or embarrasses me, I'm going to challenge you, to us all, to remove those blinders. Remove those blind spots. It can be difficult. It can be painful. You know, Jesus talks about pruning. That's not a pleasant experience. That's getting rid of some things that may have been there for a while. But as long as they're there, we're not going to grow into being the person that God created and therefore saved us to be. We have to release those things, release the baggage from the past so that we can move forward in a relationship with Christ. Remove the blinders. Deal with those things, even though they're hard. I get it. I know they're hard. I know some are extremely hard. But to be all that God has saved us to be, that's what we have to do. Thank you, Logan and Zach. Hey, a couple things. Tomorrow night we have small group, as we always do on Monday nights. Most Monday nights anyways, at 6:30. But we're in the middle of studying the book of James with Francis Chan. We're flying him every week in here. But no, we're not. He's usually on the video. But tomorrow night we're just kind of having fellowship. So if you like fried chicken, does anybody not like fried chicken? Okay, good. So you can come. Everybody come. 6:30 tomorrow night. We're going to have fried chicken. We're just going to fellowship together in the front room and just have a great time together. So please come. If you haven't been before, it's okay because we're not in James tomorrow anyway, so we're just eating. So anybody can eat. And everybody needs to eat. So please come. 6:30 tomorrow night. Let me pray this over you. Before we leave, we do this every week. It's found in the book of Numbers, chapter 6, verse 24 through 26. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. And we pray that the Lord will lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Be intentional this week in removing those blinders and go in peace with God. Thank you so much for being here. See you next week.